The void doesn't care. It never has. It stretches, cold and indifferent, across light-years of impossible distance, swallowing stars whole and spitting out nebulae like cosmic ash. In this vast, uncaring theater, empires rise and fall on the whims of physics and the desperation of sentience. And for the last 7 standard cycles, the galaxy has watched, with a mixture of morbid fascination and profound relief, as the K'thar Hegemony turned its gaze and its terrifyingly efficient war machine toward a single insignificant blue-green marble orbiting a middling yellow star. Shell system, Earth. Humanity. They called it the Silent Siege, not because there was no fighting. Oh, there was fighting, brutal and relentless, but because the K'thar didn't speak. They didn't broadcast ultimatums, demand surrender, or even acknowledge human attempts at communication beyond the cold, precise targeting solutions of their plasma lances. They simply arrived. Their ships, sleek obsidian daggers wreathed in shimmering energy fields, materialized at the edge of the Oort cloud like phantoms. Faster than light, silent as death. They bypassed humanity's nascent, stuttering FTL probes with contemptuous ease. Their technology wasn't just superior, it was alien in a way that defied human comprehension, operating on principles that made Einstein weep in his grave. The K'thar Hegemony. A collective consciousness bound by rigid hierarchy and an unshakable belief in their own cosmic destiny. To them, individuality was weakness, emotion a flaw in the logic engine. They saw the universe as a series of resources to be cataloged, optimized, and consumed, and Earth was a resource anomaly, a planet teeming with chaotic, unpredictable biological life, a Deathworld by their sterile standards. Unstable, illogical, wasteful, yet persistent. Annoyingly, infuriatingly persistent. From the K'thar Command Nexus aboard the dreadnought Silent Maw, High Strategist Kaelen observed the holographic projection of the Sol system. Pinpricks of light marked human defenses. The battered orbital platforms of Luna, the desperate fortifications on Mars, the scattered flotilla clinging to the asteroid belt like barnacles on a sinking ship. His multifaceted eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the data streams flowing across his neural interface. Human losses, catastrophic. K'thar losses, statistically negligible. Yet, the anomaly persisted. The humans, not with the cold efficiency of the hegemony, but with a terrifying, illogical ferocity. They sacrificed ships in suicidal charges. They booby-trapped derelict stations with crude explosives. They used their own wounded as bait. It was inefficient, wasteful, and utterly baffling. Why do they not capitulate? Kaelen's thought impulse pulsed through the command net. The outcome is mathematically certain. Their extinction serves the greater optimization of galactic resources. The silence from his subordinates was the only answer. The humans defied logic. They were a variable the hegemony's flawless predictive algorithms couldn't compute. A glitch in the cosmic code. On the scarred surface of Luna, in the reinforced command bunker designated Persephone's cradle, General Aris Thorne watched the same holographic display, but through human eyes shadowed by exhaustion, etched with lines of grief, yet burning with a stubborn, unquenchable fire. The air tasted of recycled oxygen, ozone from overloaded circuits, and the faint metallic tang of blood that never quite washed out. Around him, the remnants of Earth's Combined Defense Command moved with the grim efficiency of those who knew they were already dead. They just hadn't stopped moving yet. Were his status on the Dauntless. Thorne's voice was gravel-scraped raw, but it carried the weight of command. Lieutenant Commander Jax Rourke, young, sharp, his face pale beneath a sheen of sweat, didn't look up from his console. "Gone, sir. Last transmission. Plasma breach in engineering. They took out 2 K'thar corvettes before they went dark." His knuckles were white on the edge of the console. The Dauntless had been his first command. His brother was aboard. Thorne closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. Another name added to the ever-growing list. Another ghost haunting the corridors of his mind. Acknowledged, Commander. Log it. Honor them. He turned to the main display, zooming in on the K'thar fleet massing near the Jovian moons. They're regrouping. preparing for the final push on Mars. They think we're broken. Sir, Rourke said, his voice tight. With respect. Are we? Luna's shields are at 30%. Mars is holding, but barely. The belters are scattered. We've lost contact with Titan, and their ships, they just appear. We can't track them until they're already firing. The despair was a physical thing in the room, thick as the recycled air. Thorne walked to the reinforced viewport. Outside, Earth hung in the blackness, a fragile jewel of blue and white, half in shadow, beautiful, vulnerable, home. He thought of his daughter, Alara, safe in the deep bunkers beneath the Himalayas. He thought of the billions who weren't. The K'thar didn't take prisoners. They didn't occupy, they cleansed efficiently, thoroughly, like wiping a smudge from a lens. They see us as animals, Thorne said, his voice low, almost a growl, chaotic, unpredictable. A flaw in their perfect machine. He turned back, his gaze sweeping over his exhausted, haunted officers. But what if that's not a flaw? What if it's our weapon? Rourke frowned. Sir? The K'thar rely on prediction. Thorne continued, pacing slowly, the weight of command heavy on his shoulders. Their entire strategy, their entire existence is built on calculating the most efficient path to victory. They expect us to act logically, to conserve resources, to retreat when outgunned, to surrender when hopeless. He stopped, his eyes locking onto Rourke's. So we do the opposite. We become the chaos they can't compute. We stop fighting their war. We start fighting ours. A murmur ran through the command staff. Hope, fragile and dangerous, flickered in the gloom. But how, General? Asked Dr. Lena Petrova, the lead xenolinguist and strategist, her voice calm but laced with skepticism. Her sharp mind had spent years trying to crack the K'thar communication protocols, finding only cold mathematical data bursts. Their technology is light years ahead. Their ships are faster, stronger, shielded against everything we throw at them. Our best fighters are like gnats against a dragon. Exactly, Thorne said, a grim smile touching his lips. They're faster, so we don't try to outrun them. We make them stop. We make them think. We make them doubt. He walked back to the main display, pointing at the swirling gas giant, Jupiter. They see the belt as a resource zone, asteroids to be mined, stations to be dismantled. They see Mars as the last military outpost. They see Earth as the primary target. He tapped a point deep within the Jovian system, near the volcanic moon Io. But they don't see he. Petrova leaned forward, her analytical mind whirring. Warring. The radiation. The gravitational stresses. It's a death trap even for our hardened probes, which is why they ignore it, Thorne stated. It's illogical, unstable, wasteful, just like us. He turned to Rourke. Jax, pull up Project Icarus. Full specs. Now, Rourke's fingers flew over the console. A new schematic bloomed on the main display. Not a ship, but a complex network of nodes, emitters, and power conduits, designed to be buried deep within Evo's tortured crust. Sir, Icarus is theoretical, unstable. The energy requirements alone, theoretical is all we have left, Commander. Thorne interrupted, his voice hardening. Icarus isn't a weapon. It's a trap, a psychological trap. We lure them in. We make them believe they've found our last desperate stronghold hidden in the chaos of Jupiter. We make them commit their main fleet. He looked at each of them, his gaze burning with conviction. And then, we show them what happens when you corner a Deathworlder. The plan was audacious, suicidal, brilliant. It required sacrificing everything they had left, ships, personnel, the last vestiges of their defensive perimeter, to sell the illusion. It required trusting that the K'thar's rigid logic would blind them to the illogical, the desperate, the human. Over the next weeks, Persephone's cradle became a hive of desperate activity. Ships that should have been guarding Mars were instead making erratic, seemingly panicked jumps towards the Jovian system, broadcasting fragmented, panicked comms about a final fallback position. False sensor ghosts were generated near Io. Automated drones, programmed with erratic flight patterns mimicking damaged human vessels, were launched on collision courses with K'thar patrols, forcing them to waste precious ordnance. It was a dance of death choreographed by Thorne, where every human life lost was a calculated step towards the grand deception. From the silent maw, Kaelen observed the human activity with growing unease. The patterns were chaotic, yes, but beneath the surface a disturbing coherence emerged. The retreats were too coordinated, the sacrifices too precise, the focus on the Jovian system, specifically the irradiated hellscape of Io, defied all strategic logic. Yet the data streams from captured human transmissions, decrypted with agonizing slowness, spoke of a Project Icarus, a final, desperate gambit hidden within Jupiter's maelstrom. The hegemony's predictive algorithms, strained by the sheer illogic of human behavior, began to fracture. Probability matrices flickered with conflicting outcomes. The certainty that had been the bedrock of K'thar's strategy began to crack. "They are luring us," a sub-strategist pulsed nervously through the command net. "It is a trap." "Illogical," Kaelen countered, his thought impulse sharp with irritation. Why would they concentrate their final weakened forces in a location of zero strategic or resource value? "It is inefficient. It is wasteful. It is human." He paused, the anomaly gnawing at his certainty. "But the data confirms their presence. Their transmissions are genuine, albeit fragmented. Their losses in the belt are consistent with a strategic withdrawal." The cold logic warred with the unsettling unpredictability. The hegemony could not afford to leave a potential stronghold unaddressed. The anomaly had to be resolved. "Prepare the Grand Fleet," Kaelen commanded, the decision settling like ice in his core. "Converge on the Jovian system. Target Io. Purge the anomaly." The day of reckoning dawned, not with sunlight, but with the sickly green glow of Jupiter filling the viewport of the Persephone's cradle. Thorne stood alone, watching the sensor display. Hundreds of K'thar signatures. Cruisers, destroyers, the massive bulk of the silent maw itself, were converging on Io, drawn like moths to a flame they couldn't understand. The human fleet, what was left of it, was scattered, playing its part in the charade, drawing fire, dying bravely to sell the lie. General Rourke's voice crackled over the comm, strained but steady. He was aboard the last gasp, a converted ore hauler packed with the core Icarus control systems, hidden deep within a canyon on Io's surface. "All nodes are active. Power coupling stable for now. We're reading massive K'thar fleet signatures inbound ETA to optimal firing solution. 10 minutes. "Understood, Jax," Thorne replied, his voice calm, belying the storm inside. "Hold position. Execute on my mark." He glanced at Petrova, who stood nearby, monitoring K'thar comms traffic. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. "They're fully committed. Aris," she whispered. "The entire Grand Fleet. They bought it." Thorne nodded, his gaze fixed on the display. The trap was set, the bait taken. Now came the hardest part, sacrifice. He keyed the fleet-wide channel, his voice resonating through every surviving human vessel, every bunker on Luna, every hidden outpost. "This is General Thorne. To all hands, all stations, all souls of Earth. The K'thar believe they have found our end. They are wrong. Today, we show them the price of underestimating a Deathworld. Today, we show them that chaos is a weapon. Stand ready. For Earth. For humanity. Execute Icarus." Io Rourke took a deep breath, his finger hovering over the final command sequence. He thought of his brother on the Dauntless. He thought of the billions on Earth. He thought of the impossible odds. He pressed the button. Deep within Io's crust, the Icarus array flared to life. Not with a weapon's blast, but with a pulse of pure, focused electromagnetic energy, amplified 1,000-fold by the moon's own intense magnetic field and the churning plasma of Jupiter's radiation belts. It wasn't aimed at the K'thar ships, it was aimed at space itself around them. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The K'thar's FTL drives, reliant on manipulating subspace fields with impossible precision, were violently disrupted, not destroyed but scrambled, like throwing a wrench into the gears of a hyper-advanced clock across the Jovian system. K'thar ships flickered, their sleek forms stuttering in and out of reality. Navigation systems went dark, targeting computers overloaded. Shields flickered and died. The silent, efficient hunters were suddenly blind, deaf, and crippled, caught in the heart of Jupiter's gravitational and electromagnetic storm. A ragged cheer erupted in Persephone's cradle. On the last gasp, Rourke let out a whoop of pure, disbelieving triumph. "It worked! General, it worked!" Thorne allowed himself a single tight nod of satisfaction. The first move was made. The K'thar were vulnerable. Now came the counterstrike. "All remaining assets," he commanded, his voice cutting through the brief elation. "Execute Phase 2. Hit them hard. Hit them fast." Before they recover, human ships, hidden in the asteroid belts, lurking in the shadow of Europa, even disguised as debris, surged forward. They weren't firing plasma lances or railguns. They were firing salvos of crude, high-yield kinetic impactors, tungsten rods accelerated to relativistic speeds. Simple, brutal, impossible to shield against when your shields were down. The K'thar fleet, a constellation of obsidian daggers moments before, became a fireworks display of silent, violent destruction as impacts tore through hulls, vaporizing sections of ships in blinding flashes of light against Jupiter's swirling clouds. From the bridge of the silent maw, chaos reigned. Alarms shrieked in discordant non-human frequencies. Kaelen's multifaceted eyes darted across failing displays. Impossible. The energy signature, it exploited a resonance frequency in our subspace manifold we did not know existed. How? The cold certainty was gone, replaced by a chilling unfamiliar sensation, panic. The humans hadn't just fought back. They had engineered the battlefield, turning the K'thar's greatest strength, their reliance on predictable physics, into their fatal weakness. They had weaponized chaos itself. Regain control, restore shields, evasive maneuvers. Kaelen's thought impulses were frantic, lashing out at his subordinates. But the damage was done. The Grand Fleet was reeling, disoriented, taking devastating losses from the relentless human kinetic barrage. On the last gasp, Rourke was frantically rerouting power, trying to keep the Icarus array stable. The feedback from disrupting the K'thar fleet was immense, threatening to tear UO apart. "General, the array's overheating. Core instability in 5 minutes. We have to shut it down or it'll blow." "Negative. Jax," Thorne barked. "Hold it as long as you can. Every second counts." He watched the tactical display, seeing K'thar ships breaking formation, trying to flee the Jovian maelstrom. They couldn't jump to FTL. The Icarus pulse had created a localized subspace distortion that would take hours to dissipate. They were trapped, but they were still dangerous. Still numerous. Suddenly, a new alert flashed on Thorne's console. Not from the K'thar fleet, from deep space, beyond the Oort cloud. A massive energy signature, growing rapidly. Petrova gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Aris, it's another fleet. K'thar. Reinforcements. A second Grand Fleet. They must have been held in reserve, waiting." The Thorne's blood ran cold. He stared at the new, terrifying cluster of signatures on the display, dwarfing even the First Fleet. They were decelerating from FTL, emerging from the void like avenging angels of darkness. The First Fleet had been a test, a probe, and humanity had just revealed its one desperate trick to the main force. The ragged cheers in Persephone's cradle died instantly, replaced by a silence so profound it felt like the vacuum of space itself had seeped into the bunker. On the last gasp, Rourke's triumphant whoop turned into a choked sob. The Icarus array flickered ominously. High strategist Kaelen, aboard the crippled silent maw, saw the arrival of the Second Fleet on his flickering display. A wave of cold, vindictive certainty washed over him, extinguishing the panic. The anomaly had been contained, the trap revealed. Now the true cleansing would begin. The humans had shown their hand, and it was a losing one. The second K'thar Grand Fleet, fresh, undamaged, and bristling with righteous fury, began its silent, inexorable advance towards the Jovian system, towards the broken remnants of humanity's last hope, towards Earth. The victory at Jupiter tasted like ash. The Icarus array had bought them time, yes, but at a horrific cost. The last gasp was gone, vaporized when the array finally overloaded. taking Jax Rourke and his crew with it. The kinetic strikes had crippled the First Fleet, but the arrival of the Second Fleet, larger and more formidable, had rendered their sacrifice almost meaningless. The K'thar weren't just angry. They were enlightened. They understood now humanity's weapon wasn't technology. It was unpredictability. And the hegemony, in its cold, logical fury, had decided the only solution was total, immediate annihilation. No more probing. No more sieges. Extermination. Earth's defenses were shattered. Luna was a silent tomb, its orbital platforms slag. Mars held, but its defenders were fighting a losing battle against overwhelming numbers, buying precious hours for the evacuation ships fleeing towards the outer system. The belt was a graveyard of shattered stations and drifting corpses. Hope was a luxury humanity could no longer afford. Survival was the only currency. In the cramped, dimly lit briefing room of the Odyssey, one of the few remaining capital ships, a battered carrier now serving as Thorne's mobile command. The air was thick with despair and the acrid smell of burnt wiring. Thorne stood before a holographic star map, the blue dot of Earth pulsing weakly, surrounded by a suffocating cloud of red K'thar signatures. His face was gaunt, etched with the weight of every life lost, every decision that led them here. The fire in his eyes was banked, replaced by a grim, exhausted resolve. "They're bypassing Mars," Petrova stated, her voice flat, devoid of its usual analytical sharpness. She looked hollowed out, haunted by the screams she'd heard over comms as K'thar plasma lances turned Martian cities to glass. Focusing all assets on Solia, they know Earth is the heart. They want it broken first. "Evacuation ships?" Thorne asked, his voice rough. "Less than 30% capacity reached the Kuiper Belt rendezvous point," reported Captain Vargas, the Odyssey's weary commander. "The rest, scattered. Hunted. The K'thar are using hunter-killer drones faster than anything we've seen. They're picking them off like flies." He slammed a fist on the table. "We're not fighting a war, General. We're presiding over an extinction event." Thorne closed his eyes. He saw Alara's face. Safe? Or just another statistic in the K'thar's cold calculus? "We knew the cost when we triggered Icarus," he said, opening his eyes, meeting their gazes. "We traded time for knowledge. We showed them we could hurt them. Now we have to show them we can win." "How?" Vargas demanded, his voice cracking. "With what? Scrap metal and prayers?" "With them," Thorne said, pointing to the star map. Not at Earth, but at the swirling chaos of the outer system. The Kuiper Belt, the scattered Oort cloud objects, the dark, empty spaces between stars. They think they've seen our chaos. They think they understand it. They think it's just desperation. A flicker of the old fire returned. But they're wrong. Our chaos isn't random. It's adaptive. It's born from billions of minds, each one capable of the illogical, the unexpected, the sacrificial. They see individuals as weak. We see them as variables, infinite variables. Petrova frowned, her mind working. "You're talking about decentralized resistance. Guerrilla tactics on a stellar scale." "More than that," Thorne said, leaning forward, his intensity cutting through the gloom. "We stop being an army. We become a swarm. Every surviving ship, every hidden station, every lone pilot in a salvaged fighter, they become independent cells. No central command. No predictable patterns. They hit supply lines. They sabotage relay buoys. They lure patrols into asteroid fields rigged with mines made from scrap. They broadcast false distress calls to draw hunters into ambushes. They do the illogical thing every single time." He looked at Vargas. "The Odyssey won't lead a fleet. It will disappear, become a ghost, coordinate the swarm through burst transmissions, then vanish, make them chase shadows." It was a strategy born of utter desperation, a rejection of everything military doctrine stood for. It felt less like a plan and more like a prayer whispered into the void. But in the faces of his officers, Thorne saw something else. A spark, not hope perhaps, but defiance, the refusal to die quietly. Aboard the K'thar command vessel, unyielding logic. High strategist Kaelen reviewed the after-action reports from the Jovian engagement. The losses of the First Fleet were significant, unacceptable. The anomaly. Humanity's capacity for illogical, self-destructive strategy had proven more dangerous than anticipated. But the arrival of the Second Fleet, under the command of the newly appointed Supreme Strategist Vorlag, had restored order. Vorlag was different, older, harder, less tolerant of anomalies. His directives were clear: total eradication, no more engagements, no more probing. Deploy the cleansing engine. Kaelen accessed the schematics of the engines, planet cracker weapons of terrifying power, designed to reduce a world's crust to molten slag in hours. Efficient. Final. The logical conclusion. Yet a sliver of doubt, a remnant of the chaos witnessed at Jupiter, nagged at him. What if the anomaly persists? What if they find another way to weaponize the illogical? He pushed the thought aside. Vorlag's logic was supreme. The anomaly would be erased with the planet. Vorlag himself stood on the observation deck of the unyielding logic, gazing at the distant blue speck of Earth. His carapace was scarred, a veteran of 100 cleansings. He felt no anger, only a cold, implacable duty. The humans were a cancer, a chaotic mutation in the ordered body of the galaxy. They had to be excised, completely. His orders were already being implemented. Hunter-killer drones, faster and more autonomous than before, scoured the outer system. The cleansing engines were being deployed from their hidden bays, their massive forms unfolding like obsidian flowers of death. Earth had hours, not days. The swarm strategy began. It was messy. It was brutal. It was gloriously, terrifyingly human. A lone freighter, the Rust Bucket, broadcast a fake SOS near a Kuiper Belt object, mimicking the signature of a crippled evacuation ship. K'thar hunter-killers, programmed for efficiency, swooped in. They found not refugees, but a cargo hold packed with jury-rigged fusion bombs. The resulting blast took out 3 drones and sent shrapnel screaming through the void, damaging a nearby K'thar supply tender. On a derelict mining station orbiting Neptune, a handful of belters, armed with scavenged pulse rifles in sheer desperation, ambushed a K'thar boarding party sent to secure the facility. They used the station's own maintenance drones as kamikaze weapons, overloading their power cores and sending them careening into K'thar soldiers. The belters died to the last man, but they held the station long enough for a hidden data cache, containing K'thar patrol routes to be transmitted to the Odyssey. Thorne, aboard the Odyssey, received the fragmented burst transmission. He saw the patrol routes, the predictable paths the K'thar hunters were taking. A plan began to form, not in his mind alone, but shared in encrypted bursts with the scattered cells. Ambush at Grid Sigma 7. Use the ice field for cover. Lure them in with a decoy signal. Hit their engines first. It wasn't an order. It was a suggestion. A seed of chaos. The ambush worked. A K'thar hunter-killer, lured by a decoy drone mimicking a damaged human fighter, flew into a dense field of nitrogen ice crystals. Hidden human ships, painted matte black and running silent, unleashed a barrage of point defense lasers, not at the hull but at the delicate sensor arrays and maneuvering thrusters, blinded and crippled. The hunter-killer spun helplessly, a sitting duck for a final brutal kinetic strike from a hidden asteroid base. Each small victory was paid for in blood. Each successful ambush cost lives. But the K'thar began to hesitate. Their patrols became more cautious, less predictable themselves, a sign of the chaos spreading, infecting even their rigid logic. Vorlag grew impatient. Reports of anomalous resistance and illogical human tactics filled his command net. The cleansing engines were almost in position. He demanded results. Eradicate the swarm. Now, Kaelen, observing Vorlag's growing frustration, felt that sliver of doubt widen. The humans weren't just fighting. They were learning, adapting faster than the hegemony's predictive models could account for. Their decentralized structure, their willingness to sacrifice individuals for the swarm was proving resilient. What is the core of this anomaly? He pulsed to his closest subordinates. What drives them to such illogical persistence? The answer came not from data, but from a captured human transmission, decrypted with immense effort. It was a personal log, fragmented, filled with static, but the emotion bled through the words. Tell Alara. I love her. Tell her to be brave. We hold the line so she can run, so she can live. Earth is worth it. Humanity is worth it. Kaelen replayed the fragment. Alara, brave, live. Worth it. Concepts utterly alien to the hegemony. Individual affection, sacrifice for another's future. The inherent value of chaotic biological life. It was illogical, wasteful, and yet, it was the engine driving the anomaly. The humans weren't fighting for resources or territory. They were fighting for each other, for a future they might never see. This was the true weapon. Not chaos, but connection. A variable the hegemony's logic could not compute because it had no frame of reference. He tried to pulse this insight to Vorlag. The anomaly stems from biological imperatives of kinship and future projection. Eradication may not be sufficient if the concept spreads. Vorlag's response was immediate, cold and final, irrelevant. Sentiment is a flaw, the anomaly will be erased with the planet. Focus on deployment. Your hesitation is noted, Kaelen. The rebuke was a death sentence in the hegemony. Kaelen felt a chill deeper than the void. He had seen the truth and it had marked him as weak, as flawed. He watched the cleansing engines, now in final position around Earth, their massive apertures glowing with building energy. The end was minutes away. Aboard the Odyssey, Thorne received the final horrifying confirmation. Sensor ghost resolved into the unmistakable signatures of the cleansing engines. Their energy buildup was off the charts. Earth had less than an hour. Vargas, Thorne said, his voice stripped bare of everything but command. Get the Odyssey to maximum burn, towards Earth. Sir? That's suicide. We can't stop those things. We need to preserve the swarm. We are the swarm's last gambit, Thorne stated, his eyes fixed on the image of Earth on the main viewer. Vorlag thinks he's won. He thinks he's seen our chaos. He hasn't seen this. He turned to Petrova, who stood pale but resolute. Lena, you have the data from the Belters, the patrol routes, the weak points in their hunter-killer drone coordination protocols. Petrova nodded, understanding, dawning in her eyes mixed with horror. The swarm, we use the swarm not to fight the engines, but to create a distraction. A massive, chaotic, illogical distraction right in the K'thar fleet's face. Exactly, Thorne said. Every ship, every cell, every pilot with a working engine. They converge on the K'thar fleet, guarding the engines. Not to win. To create so much noise, so much chaos, so much unpredictable, suicidal aggression that Vorlag's sensors are blinded. His command net overloaded. We make him look away from Earth for just 30 seconds. 30 seconds for what? Vargas asked, bewildered. For this, Thorne said, pulling up a final schematic on his console. It was crude, almost laughable compared to K'thar tech. Network of modified comms satellites, jury-rigged with stolen K'thar power cells and human-made EMP emitters, hidden in Earth's upper atmosphere during the early days of the siege. Project Phoenix. We never had the power to activate it until now. Until the cleansing engines started charging, their energy buildup, it's bleeding into the upper atmosphere. It's giving us the juice we need. Petrova's eyes widened. An atmospheric EMP. On that scale, it could fry every unshielded circuit on the planet, including ours, including the cleansing engine's targeting and firing control systems. Thorne finished, his voice grim. If we can blind Vorlag's fleet for 30 seconds and fry the engine's final targeting lock, they'll fire blind into empty space, or worse, into each other. It was the most desperate, illogical human plan yet. Sacrifice the entire remaining swarm in a suicidal charge to create a moment of chaos, hoping a jury-rigged EMP could disrupt planet-killer weapons. It had a near-zero chance of success. Thorne opened the fleet-wide channel one last time. His voice, raw but steady, filled the void. This is General Thorne. To every soul still fighting, every heart still beating in the dark, the K'thar think they've won. They think Earth is already dead. Show them they're wrong. Converge on the Sol defensive perimeter. Maximum aggression. Maximum chaos. Give them hell. Give them everything you have. For Earth. For Alara. For the future. Now. Across the outer system, in hidden asteroids, derelict stations, and battered ships, humans heard the call. Pilots who had lost everything, soldiers with nothing left to lose, civilians who had picked up a weapon. They all turned their vessels towards the heart of the storm, not with hope, but with fury, with love, with the illogical, unbreakable spirit of a Deathworlder cornered. The swarm surged. 1,000 points of light, small and insignificant against the K'thar armada, but burning with a ferocity that defied physics. They came in from all vectors, firing everything they had, ramming ships, broadcasting static on every frequency, creating a maelstrom of unpredictable violence right in the face of the K'thar fleet guarding the cleansing engines. Aboard the unyielding Logic, Vorlag was momentarily stunned. The sheer suicidal audacity of it. Thousands of tiny, insignificant craft throwing themselves against his shields like insects against a wall. It was inefficient, wasteful, illogical, but it was also overwhelming. Sensor screens flickered with false contacts. Commanded pulses were drowned in static. Hunter-killer drones, confused by the chaotic signals, fired on friend and foe alike. For the first time, Vorlag felt a flicker of something akin to alarm. The anomaly was everywhere. Focus fire, eliminate the swarm, protect the engines. He pulsed, his commands sharp with uncharacteristic urgency. In that moment of distraction, as the K'thar fleet turned its full attention to the suicidal human swarm, Thorne aboard the Odyssey, now screaming towards Earth at maximum burn, gave the final order. Activate Phoenix, now. Deep in Earth's atmosphere, the hidden network of satellites flared, not with light, but with a silent, invisible wave of electromagnetic energy, supercharged by the bleeding power of the charging, cleansing engines. It washed over the planet and over the massive weapons in orbit. On the unyielding Logic, Vorlag's display showing the cleansing engine's status flickered violently, then went dark. Alarms shrieked. Targeting systems offline. Firing sequence aborted. Primary control lost. No! Vorlag's thought impulse was a scream of pure, unadulterated fury and disbelief. How? The cleansing engines, deprived of their final targeting lock, their firing sequences scrambled by the atmospheric EMP, discharged their cataclysmic energy not at Earth but wildly into space. One beam lanced out, vaporizing a distant K'thar supply ship. Another struck the flank of a K'thar cruiser, tearing it apart. A third dissipated harmlessly into the void. The planet killers had been turned into cosmic fireworks. A ragged, disbelieving cheer erupted from the remnants of the human swarm, even as their ships were being torn apart by K'thar fire. They had done it. They had bought Earth more time, but the cost was absolute. The swarm was annihilated. The Odyssey, caught in the crossfire as it neared Earth, took a direct hit. Thorne felt the deck lurch violently, alarms blaring, the lights flickering. He saw Earth, safe for now, hanging in the viewport. He thought of Alara. He smiled. Just a little. Then the bridge exploded. Silence. Then the groan of tearing metal. Smoke filled the air. Thorne was thrown against his restraints, blood trickling from his temple. He was alive. Barely. The Odyssey was dead in space. Adrift, its engines silent, its weapons gone. Around him, the void was littered with the wreckage of the human swarm and the damaged K'thar fleet. The cleansing engines hung dark and inert. Aboard the unyielding Logic, Vorlag surveyed the carnage. His fleet was damaged, his ultimate weapon neutralized. And the anomaly, the humans, they had won this round through sheer, incomprehensible illogic and sacrifice. Rage, cold and absolute, filled him. This could not stand. He would not be humiliated by primitives. He activated the primary comms channel, not to his fleet, but broadcasting on all human frequencies. A rare, deliberate act of communication. Humanity, Vorlag's voice, synthesized into a cold, grating monotone that scraped the soul, echoed through the ruins of the Odyssey and every surviving human receiver. Your illogical resistance is noted. Your temporary reprieve is an error in calculation, soon to be corrected. You have shown us the depth of your anomaly. Therefore the hegemony has revised its strategy. He paused, the silence more terrifying than any threat. We will not cleanse Earth. we will preserve it. As a specimen. A zoo. A monument to the flaw of chaotic life. Your planet will be encased, sterilized of all higher life, but the biosphere maintained. You will be studied. Your illogical persistence dissected. Your species will end not in fire, but in observation, forever. The message ended. The implications were worse than death. Eternal imprisonment. The end of humanity as a free, evolving species. A living museum exhibit for the cold, logical hegemony. Thorne, bleeding and broken on the bridge of his dying ship, heard the message. Despair, colder than the void, threatened to swallow him whole. They had saved Earth from destruction, only to condemn it to a fate worse than extinction. The K'thar hadn't been beaten. They had simply changed the rules of the game, and humanity, with no ships, no weapons, no hope, had no move left to make. The silence after Vorlag's pronouncement was heavier than neutron star matter. It pressed down on the shattered remnants of humanity, crushing the fragile hope born from the Phoenix Gambit. Earth was saved from annihilation, only to be sentenced to an eternity as a galactic curiosity. A Deathworld petri dish under the hegemony's cold, unblinking gaze. The K'thar fleet, though battered, began the grim work of deploying containment fields, massive energy nets designed to encase the planet, severing it from the cosmos, freezing its chaotic biosphere in stasis. The war wasn't over. It had merely entered a new, more insidious phase. Extermination had been replaced by eternal imprisonment. Aboard the crippled Odyssey, drifting in the debris field near Earth, Aris Thorne fought to stay conscious. Pain was a white-hot brand across his ribs. The bridge was a tomb of flickering consoles and the acrid stench of burnt insulation. He saw Earth through the cracked viewport. Beautiful, blue, and now utterly doomed. Not to fire, but to silence. To observation. Alara, what kind of life would she have in a cage? The thought was a knife twisting in his gut. He had sacrificed everything. Jax, the swarm, his own ship, his own life. For this. General? A weak voice crackled over the internal comm. Petrova. She was alive, trapped in the science lab, her leg pinned under collapsed bulkheads. The containment fields. They're deploying. We have maybe an hour before they seal. Thorne tried to speak, but only a cough, tasting of blood, came out. He fumbled for the comms switch. Lena. Option. None, Aris. Her voice was thick with tears and pain. The Odyssey is dead. All comms are fried except this short-range channel. No power for weapons, engines, nothing. We're just driftwood. A sob escaped her. We failed. We saved the planet only to lose its soul. Thorne closed his eyes, the weight of failure crushing him. Vorlag's cold logic had outmaneuvered them. They had played the chaos card, and the hegemony had simply changed the game board. What was left? What variable, what illogical human spark could possibly counter this? Then, through the haze of pain and despair, a memory surfaced. Not of battle, but of Petrova's earlier words spoken in the tense days before Jupiter. They see individuals as weak. We see them as variables. Infinite variables. And Kaelen's fragmented insight, gleaned from that captured human log. The anomaly stems from biological imperatives of kinship and future projection. Kinship. Future projection. Connection. His eyes snapped open, fixed not on Earth but on the K'thar fleet. Specifically, on the command vessel. The unyielding logic. Vorlag was there. Cold. Logical. Certain. But was he alone in his certainty? What about Kaelen, the strategist who had shown a flicker of something when confronted with the concept of love, of sacrifice for a future unseen? Vorlag had rebuked him, marked him as flawed. In the hegemony, that was a death sentence. Or worse, a path to irrelevance. But what if that flaw was the key? Vergus. Thorne rasped into the comm, remembering the captain was likely in engineering trying to jury-rig something. Status. Engines are slagged. General. Vargas's voice was grim. Life support failing. But I've got a little juice left in the emergency battery. Enough for one short burst on the comms array. Maybe enough to send a tight beam message. If I can get a lock. Thorne's mind raced. the pain momentarily forgotten. A message, not to Earth, not to any human, to the unyielding logic, to Kaelen. It was insane, suicidal, illogical, perfectly beautifully human. Lena, Thorne said, his voice gaining strength, a desperate plan forming. That captured human log. The one with Elara. Do you still have the raw data? Unencrypted? Yes, in the science lab mainframe. Why? Get it. Strip out everything but the emotional subtext. The love, the fear, the hope for her future. Amplify it. Make it visceral, raw, like a scream in the void. He turned to Vargas. Miguel, I need you to bypass every safety protocol. Route that data stream through the comms array. Aim it, not at Vorlag's command deck. Aim it at Kaelen's personal neural interface node. You said you cracked their basic comms protocols during the siege, right? Petrova gasped. Aris. That's broadcasting pure, unfiltered human emotion directly into a K'thar strategist's mind. It could shatter him. Or worse, alert Vorlag. Or it could show him the why, Thorne insisted, his voice burning with conviction. The core of the anomaly. Not just the chaos, but the reason for it. The thing his logic can't compute because he's never felt it. It's our last variable, Lena. Our last, illogical, desperate, human play. Do it. Silence stretched, filled only by the groans of the dying ship and the distant hum of the deploying K'thar containment fields. Then Petrova's voice, shaky but resolute, routing the data stream now, Aris. Amplifying emotional resonance, bypassing all dampeners. It's like opening a vein. Vargas? Locking onto Kaelen's neural signature. Now. Tight beam established. Ascending. Now. On the unyielding logic, High Strategist Kaelen was confined to a monitoring station, his access to primary systems revoked after his illogical query to Vorlag. He watched the containment fields deploy with a sense of profound emptiness. The anomaly would be contained, studied but never understood. The humans' sacrifice, their love for their future, it would be reduced to data points in a sterile lab. It felt wrong. A flaw in the optimization. But Vorlag's logic was supreme. He had no choice but to accept it. Suddenly, his neural interface flared with an unprecedented violent intrusion. Not data, not logic. Feeling. A tidal wave of raw, unfiltered human emotion crashed into his consciousness. The desperate love of a parent for a child, the bone-deep fear of loss, the fierce, illogical hope for a future unseen, the crushing weight of sacrifice made for that hope. It was chaotic, overwhelming, terrifying, and utterly devastatingly real. It bypassed his logic centers, striking directly at something primal, something the hegemony had spent millennia suppressing. He saw Elara's face, not as a data point, but as a person. He felt the parents' terror, their love, their reason for fighting against impossible odds. Kaelen recoiled, a strangled, non-human sound escaping his mandibles. His multifaceted eyes widened in shock, then dawning, horrifying understanding. This was the anomaly, not the chaos of battle but the purpose behind it, the connection, the willingness to endure anything, sacrifice everything, for the sake of another's tomorrow. It wasn't illogical, it was a different kind of logic. A logic of the heart, not the machine. And in that moment, Kaelen realized the hegemony's fatal flaw. It had no heart. It could not compute what it could not feel, and without understanding the why, it could never truly contain the anomaly. It would always be vulnerable to the unforeseen variable. Vorlag's cold voice cut through Kaelen's epiphany, laced with suspicion. Kaelen, report. Your neural activity is anomalous. Kaelen looked up from his console, his gaze meeting Vorlag's across the command deck. In his eyes, Vorlag saw not the expected submission, but a terrifying clarity, a flaw that had become a weapon. The anomaly is not contained, Supreme Strategist. Kaelen pulsed, his thought impulse calm, resolute, and utterly alien to the hegemony. It is infectious. Before Vorlag could react, Kaelen moved. Not with violence, but with the cold, precise logic the hegemony revered. He accessed the one system still partially under his control, the unyielding logic's internal security protocols. His fingers flew over the console, inputting a sequence that bypassed Vorlag's command override. He targeted the containment field generators. "What are you doing, Kaelen?" Vorlag roared, lunging forward. "Optimizing the outcome," Kaelen pulsed, his final act of logic. He initiated a catastrophic overload sequence in the primary containment field generator linked directly to the unyielding logic. Alarms shrieked, far louder and more panicked than before. On the main display, the massive energy net surrounding Earth flickered violently, then began to collapse in on itself, its structural integrity failing. But the overload wasn't contained. Feedback surged through the unyielding logic's own power conduits. Kaelen didn't flinch as the console before him exploded in a shower of sparks. He didn't cry out as the energy surge ripped through his neural interface, frying his mind. His last thought wasn't of logic, but of a human child named Ilara, and the terrifying, beautiful illogic of love. He died understanding. The unyielding logic, the heart of the K'thar Second Fleet, convulsed. Secondary explosions ripped through its obsidian hull. The containment field generator, critically damaged, detonated in a silent, sun-bright flash that vaporized the ship and sent a shockwave rippling through the K'thar fleet. On the Odyssey, Thorne, Petrova, and Vargas watched in stunned disbelief as the K'thar command ship erupted. The containment fields flickered and died. The K'thar fleet, leaderless and reeling from the sudden catastrophic loss of its flagship and the collapse of its primary objective, descended into chaos. Without Vorlag's iron will or Kaelen's cold logic, their rigid hierarchy fractured. Ships collided in panicked maneuvers. Hunter-killer drones spun out of control. The silent, efficient machine of the hegemony ground to a halt, paralyzed by the unforeseen variable. A single K'thar strategist, who had Kaelen, Petrova whispered, tears streaming down her face, understanding dawning. He understood. Thorne slumped back in his chair, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a profound, aching sorrow and a flicker of something else. Respect. For an enemy who had seen the truth. He saw the anomaly, Thorne murmured, his voice weak, and he chose humanity. The K'thar fleet, now a disorganized rabble, began to retreat, not in an orderly fashion but in a panicked scramble, jumping to FTL as fast as their damaged drives would allow, fleeing the chaotic graveyard they had created and the terrifying, incomprehensible anomaly that had just consumed their supreme strategist and turned their own weapon against them. The siege of Sol was over. Not with a bang, but with a whimper of shattered logic. Weeks later, Earth was scarred but alive. Cities lay in ruins. Oceans churned with debris, but the biosphere, though wounded, breathed. The sky, once filled with the silent daggers of K'thar ships, was clear. Humanity began the long, painful work of rebuilding. Not just structures, but hope. In a makeshift hospital in the ruins of Geneva, Aris Thorne sat by a window, his ribs still bandaged, watching the sunrise paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. Ilara sat beside him, her small hand in his, her eyes wide with the trauma of the past months, but also with a dawning resilience. She was safe. Earth was free. Dr. Lena Petrova entered, holding a data slate. She looked exhausted but resolute. The long-range probes, they've confirmed it. Aris, the K'thar fleet, it's gone, completely withdrawn from the sector. And there's more. She handed him the slate. It displayed fragmented, heavily encrypted, K'thar data streams, painstakingly decrypted. It seems the hegemony is in turmoil. Vorlag's death and Kaelen's defection. It's caused a schism. Some factions are calling for a complete reassessment of the human anomaly. Others are demanding total war, but their unity it's broken. Thorne looked at the data, then out at the rising sun, then down at Ilara's trusting face. The war wasn't over. The galaxy was still vast and dangerous, but they had won more than just survival. They had proven that chaos, when fueled by connection and sacrifice, could shatter even the most rigid logic. They had shown the universe that a Deathworlder's spirit was not just resilient, but contagious. He squeezed Ilara's hand. "We held the line, little one," he whispered, his voice rough but warm. "Now it's your turn to build what comes next." As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows that slowly receded, Thorne knew the true victory wasn't just in the K'thar's retreat. It was in the quiet hum of rebuilding cities, the laughter of children returning to playgrounds, the stubborn green shoots pushing through the rubble. It was in the knowledge that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't its ships or its strategies, but its unbreakable, illogical, beautiful capacity to love, to hope, and to fight for a future it might never see. And somewhere in the cold void between stars, the hegemony was learning, to its profound and unsettling cost, that the most dangerous variable in the universe wasn't chaos. It was heart.